Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about the underlying connections and root causes which shape our lives through various ideas and current events. As we discuss and debate, we hope you'll be challenged to think again and then to engage with wisdom in our increasingly hostile and hurting culture. Today we're going to talk about God's first family of angels. We're going to talk about government violence and what to do in that context, and we're going to talk about getting revenge. I hear the music go out before I'm done?
Yeah, I was laughing.
I
have this theory of like, do people watch longer the longer we have it, or do they drop off and think, what are these guys talking about?
Yeah. All right, let's lead off with Bill Ackman. Did you follow any of this? Or
I did not. I just
Bill
glanced at
Ackman
it before we started. Tell me more.
Okay, so Bill Ackman, a billionaire hedge fund manager, Harvard grad, him and his wife, and he's, I don't know, the reports say he's given $50 million to Harvard over a few years here. Anyway, he was instrumental in Claudine Gay, in her dismissal and pressuring the board.
The president of Harvard stepped down under pressure.
Yes, yeah. Under pressure. She, with their inability, the three presidents' inability to say to Congress, you're in trouble if you support mass murder of Jews on our college campuses. Anyway, and then, of course, her plagiarism issues that helped force the issue. But she resigns. He helped do it. So they get mad at him for that. Harvard does. And what ends up happening is the Business Insider, another leftist organization, journalist organization, comes after his wife and accuses his wife of plagiarism. Now, because she graduated from Harvard, they both did. His only beef, and I actually read his long Twitter post on plagiarism and Harvard's response. It was exceptionally well done. I highlighted, just saved it in my little political notes about, he talked about going and investigating, and he talked about the DEI has worked a destruction. And he says it's not what it sounds like it's good. And it's almost like a newbie explaining what we conservatives have been talking about for a long time, right? Not a newbie is not the right word, but somebody who's like awakening to being woke, right? Mm-hmm. And anyway, his real complaint with Business Insider was that they challenged his wife and they gave him no opportunity to look at any of the citations. They emailed them like 45 minutes before the story went live. And he just says this kind of journalism is disgusting.
Well, not only that, I was looking at it briefly. The accusations are that she plagiarized Wikipedia. But here's the trick. Not only is Wikipedia well known for being leftist now, but I could take excerpts from your dissertation, put them into Wikipedia now, and then claim that you copied me.
That's right, yeah. So they did their research on what the accusations were, and they said she did miss a couple quotations that she could have put in, but she goes, everything was cited. The problem with Claudine's, Ms. Gay's things is she actually quoted verbatim and didn't cite in the bibliography, which is supposed to be a 25-page bibliography. Anyway, So what he then says is he's going after Business Insider. He goes, I have resources, and I am going to go after you and other university presidents and all this crap, and I'm going to find all your plagiarism, and I have the resources to do it. Right. So it's an escalation of war.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about, so I've titled this little thing, The Beckett Effect. Did you see the movie Beckett?
No, I haven't.
Peter O'Toole and...
I've heard of it.
I don't remember his name now, but oh man, it's an exceptional movie. So the story is that Peter O'Toole, as the born nobility, and then what's his name? It's not Charleston Heston. It's I'll think of his guy anyway in a minute. Anyway, they are rich young playboys together in medieval Europe.
Richard Burton.
Richard Burton, thank you.
I'm looking it up here.
And so they are involved in all kind of shenanigans as young men. O'Toole becomes the king, and he says, great, I'm going to make you my vice regent. You're going to be, and our shenanigans are going to be more glorious. Mm-hmm. So he makes him the vice regent, and he puts a ring on his finger. And then even better, they got rid of this rascally Archbishop of Canterbury, and I'm going to make you the Archbishop too. Totally get away with stuff now.
Right.
Makes him the Archbishop. And Richard Burton, he can't do it. The character can't. Beckett. He can't. It's God's
He refuses.
I mean, refuses is the right thing, but it's more of a reluctant. He wants to be able to support his friend, but now he can't. It's sacred. Something is wrong with this. I can't do it. And he does begin to refuse and oppose his best friend, the king. And the king takes the one ring away, but is fearful of the public opinion to take the clergy ring away. And he ends up killing Becket, his friend.
Right.
And so you have this clash of political and sacred, and the betrayal of the one. And I was thinking about this.
So
Bill
how does this connect? Yeah.
is so angry at the betrayal of Harvard that they didn't stand up. And then Business Insider attacking his wife, and he's saying, this is ridiculous. Okay, I've been your ally and friend, and what you're asking is ridiculous. Not to stand up to anti-Semitism, to okay plagiarism that is so repugnant in this leader, and then to come after my wife when it isn't.
Yeah.
I'm going after you now.
So
they turned him into a Becket.
In this connection, because in Becket, the bishopric, right? The church is the sacred.
That's right.
Is Harvard the sacred?
No. I think Ackman is the sacred. We'll see if Harvard kills him. If the machine kills him.
But I'm saying to say that you've gone too far means you've touched something that shouldn't be touched.
I know, but the reason I think Becket is Ackman is because Becket awakens to his position, and I said, I can't go there.
Right.
That's a line I can't cross.
But what's interesting to me is someone like Bill Ackman, who I don't know who that is, but other wealthy people, they do have sacred space within the culture. It's just not church, and it's not God.
Oh, that's true.
Right?
That's true.
It's like you touched my wealth. You touched my
They
my
have
prestige.
Yeah.
Now we're going after you.
So in my little note here, I titled episode 13 because then I got to thinking, this has happened over and over again. And so I have a small list here.
Yeah.
Really, where the left, and I think what's interesting, it's almost in its cannibalization of itself, it turns its own followers against itself.
Yeah.
By going too far in something in their arena that they say, this is sacred. I can't go that far. You guys are crazy.
Right.
And then they kill him. They go after him. So Elon Musk, I have here as the most obvious current one, but there's actually quite a list. J.K. Rowling is on the left, and now they're trying to kill her because of what she's saying. This is too far.
Yeah.
Right? Glenn Greenwald, he helped make that big, I don't even remember the name of the website before, big news aggregate, and they took it away from him because he wanted freedom of speech, even for those he disagreed with, and they said no way. So he had to go and start his own. Matt Taibbi, Rolling Stone, he's a center left. Barry Weiss, New York Times, kicked out because I'm going to try to have fair reporting in the New York Times, even if we might not agree with that. There's an editorial board. Nope, you can't do that. You're kicked out. She goes, starts her own and opposes.
Yeah.
Alex Berenson, New York Times reporter. Bill Maher, this is lunacy. It's not that these people have become conservative.
No, that's right.
But they've been made enemies of the machine, and the machine is on some level of willingness to go destroy what was their ally before because they feel betrayed by them.
Well, it's interesting. We were talking about
Chappelle, Russell Brand,
Yeah, there you
Tulsi Gabbard, R.F. Kennedy, and Donald Trump himself.
even Trump. A couple episodes back, we were talking about persuasion and the bell curve.
Yeah.
And that if you create a group on the right, it'll shift the bell curve. But what actually has happened, and I was thinking about it afterward, is there are now groups on both sides, and the middle is emptying out. So you're creating two separate bell curves, the leftist bell curve and the conservative one. And so you get these people sort of in the middle saying, well, now where do I go?
That's true.
Because neither group appeals to me.
And I think all of them are willing to lean left until they say, but this is dishonest or this is whatever. And the left says, well, you'll toe the line or else. No, you can't make me do that.
So there's a DEI connection to this too, right? And that is that if let's say I'm going to prioritize DEI in my airline, let's say, right?
Yeah.
And have doors fall off of planes in flight. But if I'm going to prioritize DEI, what I'm going to end up doing, besides hiring people who fit into categories that don't impact their ability to do the job, and therefore you're hiring poorly, what you're also doing is you're going to tend to hire inexperienced and younger people, right?
That's true.
Because who's been around and has the jobs is usually the white folks, the males, the people who've been in power in the past.
That's right.
So you're trying to upend that structure, right? The structural racism and all those things. But functionally, what you get is naivete,
Yep.
easily influenced,
That's
and
exactly
ideologically captured.
That's right.
And
That's
so
exactly
what you
right.
create is a centralization within these organizations of power to just a few people, because now all these mid-level and upper-level bureaucrats and administrators, they do what they're told.
They're yes men.
Because you make an ideological leverage point, you put a guilt on them, you're not living
Yeah.
up to this ideal, they're going to fall in line.
Yeah, that's
because
right.
they're young, they don't know better, and
That's right.
their whole career's ahead of them, and they've got a lot to lose.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because
And-
what all those names have in common is they're all 50 years and above, right?
Right.
They've got a lot of experience. They know what's going on.
I agree. I think
so
that's
you gotta get
exactly
those
right.
people out.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Well, hey, if you're enjoying the conversation at this point, you can click to subscribe and get notifications if you've got those turned on of our things. You can also click like, leave a comment, share with a friend. All right. Let's talk to next government violence. Let's talk about this. I have a question. We've got a couple different branches to talk about here. You've got some stuff on Germany, World War II. Let me lead it with this question. I've been thinking more about this, the issue of our times, and it really highlights the thing you and I keep butting heads over, at least at some level. What to do when, and I put it in quotes here, our democracy is violent and corrupt. It's any government, but it's a different question when you're in a democracy and the citizenry are given a certain amount of liberty and freedom. If there's another kind of form of government, then the question gets altered just a tad bit. But why don't we go ahead and start with, we'll come back to what that means, but why don't you say your Germany thing, because I think this is an illustration of it.
So this is in the news. A year or two ago, for quite a while, Dutch farmers were sort of in revolt, right? And we saw video of the tractors filling the streets.
Revolt against?
They're against the EU. The EU has been cracking down and restricting their ability to have farms.
That's exactly, yeah.
Access
Trying take
to
their
fertilizer.
farmland. Yeah.
And fertilizer was getting hard to come by because of the lockdowns and all the ramifications of that too. I don't know
It's
if
the
that's still going
strategy
on.
like in California where we'll make bullets illegal. We'll make magazines only this size.
Yeah, right.
They failed to take away guns, so they'll do all these other things that effectively do it, and that's what the Dutch government was doing.
So
with
now the
farmland.
German farmers are up.
Now
in
the
revolt.
German-
And I was seeing it this week. It's nowhere on any of the news, including
I know.
conservative that I follow. Maybe
Yeah.
a tiny little blip. But you just search on X and you'll see video after video.
It popped up like 3 or 4 days ago, and I haven't seen it since, just like you said.
Thousands of tractors in the streets of
Yeah.
Berlin shutting down the whole city, and no
So
one's talking
they're doing
about
the
it.
trucker thing, right?
That's right.
Their own form of the trucker protest going and passive resistance. We're going to go and turn off our machines, and we're stopping traffic. You're killing us.
So I think part of this is the consequence of the phrase essential worker. Because the people who are essential workers were grocery stores, delivery people, farmers. And then everybody else, I mean, not everybody else, but upper middle class, white collar people, they just got to stay home and do work in their pajamas and go to meetings that they weren't really paying attention to. And it's like, okay, so now there's this really stark difference. It becomes suddenly obvious what you think of us versus what you think of yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the laws hurt more when you've got that social distinction.
So this is oppression is what it is. Government oppression. I use the word language violent and corrupt.
Right.
But those work too. But it's corruption, it's oppression, it's those that have been placed, so speaking then as Christians, providentially in a position of authority that God grants on the earth.
Yeah.
They abuse that over the citizenry, right? And in various forms. And they're really all elements of violence. Even the ones against the farmers are elements of violence. It's just passive violence. It's hidden under lawfare, so to speak.
Right.
Right?
Well, all law is a threat of violence.
In a sense, that's exactly right.
It's the majority exerting their power over you with a monopoly on violence, saying no one is allowed to use violence except the representatives of the majority, who are the police.
Or we could say this, use the Bible phrase of the governments are given the sword.
Yes. Right.
And,
Violence.
and they're supposed to, that in a sense, you could really say that's violence. We only think of violent as a negative word, but in a sense, you're stepping beyond that and saying, it could be a positive word as well.
Well, and they're exerting the wrath of God, right? And
Exactly.
And they're doing that in a practical way. What substitutes for the wrath of God is the will of the people, the morality of the community. And if it aligns with God, then the government is functioning correctly. But there's a point also where you can say, if I'm like a Bill Ackman or an Elon Musk, I can sway the will of the people. I can exert things in the direction I think they should go. And that's always been the case. And I don't think you can create a society where there aren't people like that saying, no, in fact.
I totally agree with that, but would add the wrinkle, but the authorities kill a lot of those people too. They kill Beckett.
That's who the war is really about, right? It's really, wars are always about king versus king.
Yeah, in a sense, that's right.
Yeah, and then the farmers have to pay, they die on the battlefield.
I mean, Trump is his own unique brand in there, but I think there's some of these people that the left utterly hates with a loathing at this point, Trump being one of them. I think they hate Tulsi Gabbard. I think they feel completely betrayed by her, and they hate her with a passion. They would destroy her.
Yeah.
They're seeking to destroy Musk right now.
Well, there's no one even your enemy is not as loathsome to you as a friend who betrays you.
Yes, that's right.
And so to say,
That's right.
like, and I think this Trump personifies this perfectly.
Yeah.
To the left, to the godless, to the billion, the money chasing, clout chasing.
That's right.
He was one of them.
Yeah.
And he was this goofy TV version.
Yeah.
And he
roll their eyes
betrayed them
at
by
him.
becoming Republican.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he's the worst
agree
enemy.
with that. Yes, I agree. So the question I think is what to do in the face of that as a Christian, a God-ordained authority that has become corrupt and violent,
Right.
that is oppressive. How does the Christian respond to that? Your illustration here are the German farmers, right? This is really Martin Luther King getting on hands and knees and walking and saying, "Arrest us. We're going to violate a very small law to let you know that what you're doing is wrong." Right?
Yeah.
What do you think the range of options are?
Well, my question is about, is democracy the thing we're actually defending? Is freedom the thing we're defending, or is justice? Because what I see is a lot of Christians saying, well, like, we don't want to exert power. We want power to the people. But therefore, who's going to stop the people with power? I think that you can see that in like arms races generally as a metaphor, but because we're in a technological arms race of influence and manipulation. So if you say, well, we need to stop people from making AI weapons, so therefore only China will have AI weapons. Do you see what I mean?
I do.
And so I think to say we shouldn't have weapons because we want peace is not the same as saying we should have the best weapons because we want peace.
I do.
So
understand
peace.
what you're saying.
So I'm putting peace and democracy in the same thing and say our democracy, is that really what we're trying to preserve, or is there something more fundamental?
Yeah,
and democracy might lose out because of it.
I don't know that I put it there in order that is what's being preserved. I only put it there because in a democracy, so I'm thinking about this as citizens. There's one way to answer this, and then I think those of us who are Christians are citizens of another kingdom,
right?
And it has some claims upon us, and those two don't always see eye to eye, the claims of the citizenry. Mm-hmm. And so I think that when we're in a democracy, we have a form of liberty to express ourselves that another governmental form doesn't have. And so as Christians, the obligation to walk in the liberties you're given under democracy, I think are higher than if you're under a king or a dictator by default. If you're in North Korea and you're a Christian, I think your heavenly citizenry is a little bit of a different message to you than it is to you and I under a democracy.
And I see that pattern in the Bible, that if you're looking in the book of Judges, which is probably as close as the Bible gets to a democracy, right? There is no king, and God is the king, and his law stands. The judgment goes upon the whole people. And when you get into the story of kings, the judgment goes onto the kings. It centers on the leaders as God's focus, because they're the ones in power and making those decisions.
I forgot to click out. I should have listed. Maybe you can click on that hyperlink, what to do there, because I was going to print that out, because the guy is, he expressed himself in a manner similar to you about a frustration, and he highlights about 6 or 7 extraordinarily violent things taking place.
Do you want me to read them?
Yeah. There's a little bullet list there, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Read those, because it highlights the question and why it's important.
So he says, in the last 4 years, we've seen our nation take a jackboot to the crotch on numerous occasions, most
That's
notably
violence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gratuitous.
unpunished rioters burning and looting as well as attacking police officers throughout
This is
2020.
the BLM. I mean, this is appalling to not stop riots
Yeah.
and massive destruction and taking of life. It's just been skipped over.
Right.
I mean, many people mention it on the right, but it's just been not acknowledged.
And I felt like it became this like, what is it, self-flagellation? Like Americans said,
I agree with
we
you.
accepted that, because our history is racist and maybe
That-
we
yeah,
are too.
yeah, we
we
deserve to
deserve
be-
this. Now, the
Yep.
reality was
I
it was
agree.
actually black neighborhoods getting rioted and burned,
I know.
looted and burned.
I know.
Businesses leaving, and they turn out to be worse
know.
off. The suburbs
know.
feel fine,
Yep.
which is generally how this kind of thing goes.
Yeah.
But, okay,
Yeah.
next thing.
Yeah.
The vulgarly tyrannical response to a virus that we now know didn't come from bat salad.
So you
Vulgarly
have said,
tyrannical.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
But you have made the statement, and you maybe 2 or 3 times a couple weeks ago, there was visible anger, and you probably had just watched something or read something, but the mass murder, really,
Absolutely.
of the vaccines, and it's continuing to this day, and it's going to continue. We don't know, 10 years, 20 years.
Well, and what's crazy to
and-
me is the manipulation of people to get the vaccine, to manipulate the data to make the vaccine look more effective by
pure
telling
evil.
everyone who'd
Yep.
already recovered to get the vaccine so that
Yep.
their data would
Yep.
look like it was
Yep.
more effective.
That's Fauci, that's Collins.
But add to that, other effective remedies that didn't make Big Pharma money were withheld.
And pushed away.
Causing
and
more people to die.
criminalized even.
That's right. Yeah.
Invectamine and all these other ones like that. Ivermectin, thank you. I'm going to be the mispronouncer, and you can always be the corrector.
All right, next bullet. A
Yeah.
dubious presidential election. I think dubious is a kind way to say that.
It's an overly kind. It's flat out stolen.
Yep. Biden intentionally
It was
gutting.
an in-your-face, boarded up. You can't even watch us.
You don't even get
count.
to look. That's
We're
right.
going to call the police, and you're forbidden.
And the fact the police went along with it. But 2020 trained him to do it.
It's not even the Kennedy issue. He probably stole Chicago. It's not even those things. It's egregious.
It's the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
Yeah. Biden intentionally gutting our nation by allowing illegal immigrants to pour over our border. Have you been watching
We're
this the last
talking
couple weeks?
the big horde again.
It's planes full.
And millions and millions.
Yeah. And then what's crazy is
It's
this-
Obama's
a time like
fundamental
this.
transformation.
That's right. In times like this, under Obama, it was similar. They'll say, we're getting 1 million this last year of illegal immigrants coming across the border, right? And they'll say, but there's only 10 million illegal immigrants in America.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
how do we get 1 million a year for 40 years?
Yeah.
And there's only 10 million.
Yeah. I think there's more 50 to 75 million. But this is violent, radical reconstitution of. It's an invasion. It is a warfare invasion.
And I think the governors like DeSantis and Abbott who are sending those people to major cities is so pure righteousness. For this reason, right? Because New York is now overrun.
Yeah.
I think it was in Brooklyn. They closed
saw
a high
that.
school.
Of its own citizens.
Yep. So all the students had to go home and do online classes so that more illegals could be housed in the
Yes.
school.
It's driving them to insane responses. But I agree. So this is the question. So Abbott and DeSantis, what they're doing, and I agree with what you're saying, but I want to put it in the question of what is the right response as citizens and even as Christians?
Yeah.
What are the nuances of it? So what's the next one?
Oh, I want to add one more thing to that.
Yeah.
And that is Musk made this prediction and then Libs of TikTok, if you ever follow her,
Oh, I don't follow her, but-
immediately showed examples that it's already happening. So Musk says they're emptying schools to fill them up. Next, they're going to come to your house, right? The hotels are full. Now they're schools. The schools are full. Now it's your house. And Libs of TikTok already showed 3 examples from around the U.S. where they are asking citizens to house illegal immigrants in their homes.
First, they're see an article about that.
So they're
2 weeks
taking
ago.
rental homes, empty apartments, and saying we're taking them over, and then eventually it'll be your basement,
Eminent
your,
domain,
your
you
extra
think?
bedroom. Yeah, it's wild. All right. Anyway, the acceptance of anti-Semitism so disturbing.
So this is the Hamas-generated crisis point, fork in the road, and all of a sudden the left is the progressive left is laid bare in their utter vile hatred.
Yeah,
they
and you
couldn't
see the
cover it in
genocidal
time.
impulse.
They couldn't cover it in time.
The thing that disturbs me the most is
And it's the kids. It's the kids that they couldn't stop. They
Yeah.
couldn't stop them because the kids are embarrassed. What's wrong, Mom and Dad? Didn't this what you guys have been telling us?
well, the thing is that there's a lot of evidence that what's causing anti-Semitism among kids is TikTok.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced
Which is
everything
Chinese
wrong.
owned.
It's the Chinese government manipulating American culture.
It is a warfare, a social technological warfare that is.
And anybody, including Republicans, or especially, the only gripe they can talk about TikTok is that the Chinese are getting our data.
Yeah.
As if that's the big rub.
Yes,
It's like,
that's
no,
a
they're
miss.
manipulating our children.
Yes.
And brainwashing them.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
All right, America's first crime family taking mad stacks from enemies and not getting punished. First as in the first family, not as in the first to go, but President Biden and his...
So the reason I think this makes the list, because this is a list of egregious, bordering on barely concealed violent rage
In
against
any
its own
normal
people.
era, any one of these would upend society.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Shot as a traitor, the Biden family.
Yeah.
I think this gets back to what's his name's comment, John Schneider. Taken out, tried, and hung as a traitor.
And in public for all to see.
That's right. And that's exactly how it was straight up. And so I think it points out the utter failure of our, we'll call it the ruling class, but left and right, to execute the just, lawful requirement.
All right, so if you're going to claim, though, that that's treachery, treason even, what exactly is the treason that the Bidens have done?
I probably would back away from the word from a constitutional because I'm not familiar enough.
Okay,
so
but,
maybe
but what is so heinous that you see
Yeah.
death as irrelevant
Well,
punishment?
they betray. It's betrayal. It's I do actually personally think that treason is a legitimate argument, but you sell our national secrets and let's not forget the balloon and all the data gathering and we just don't even know how much, but you basically sell our military and our country's security to a foreign power.
Yeah.
The one thing that the president, we often forget it, except for certain conversations, he's the commander-in-chief of the army. Why would a president be called that? Because that's the primary duty of government, to protect us against foreign invaders. We live in a hostile world. And so from the framers' perspective, there's probably two or three things, but the most prominent is, okay, we think it's legitimate for the states to collect taxes in some form in order to protect us against, in that context, it was France and Britain and whatever other nations, because that's the sacred duty of the military commander-in-chief.
Right, yeah.
And that is a betrayal of that duty, the compromising us. And that doesn't even get into the wholesale element of laundering money through Ukraine and just the scandalous. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the element of betrayal as primarily to China, who has world domination as its goal.
Yeah. It's one thing to try to launder money through organized crime in Ukraine, which they clearly were doing as well.
That's a good way to say it.
It's another thing to take our global enemies and give them
a foothold,
compromising power and influence in our country. Yeah.
If you might not remember it because of the timing, but the Clintons, when they were in office, there was a big scandal about secret data. They got money for letting some Chinese people escape with data.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a big deal at the time, but it was greed. It was pure Clinton greed. Right. And anyway.
Yeah, they did. Clinton did his own deals with China too, because he claimed to balance the U.S. budget when in fact all he was doing was selling a huge number of treasury bonds to China.
Yeah.
Giving them leverage over our federal banking system.
Yeah.
So I don't know if his hands are that clean either.
Is that the end of the list?
Yeah.
The Biden. Okay. Well, what I think and the reason the article caught my attention is I could read the exasperation in the author.
Oh, and there's two more.
Okay.
Persecution of their main political rivals to the deep state.
Okay. Again.
Obviously, right? Having
trying to imprison, arrested, indicted, taken off ballots. This literally is what banana republics. I know that gets thrown around a lot, but it's literally what happens in the most corrupt of nations.
Yeah, and lastly,
Putin wins by 74% because he picks the guy who's going to get vote, and he picks how many votes he gets. There is
I heard
no
somebody
opposition.
making this argument for Nikki Haley. We've talked about the deep state machine backing her as the Republican choice. The example somebody gave is, who do you know that actually likes Nikki Haley? Like, of Republicans, what Republicans do you know who like her?
Yeah.
She's getting all these numbers. She's getting all this supposed support.
I think this is legitimate.
Rand Paul just came out. Did you make an endorsement for president?
No.
He said, "I'm not ready to endorse anybody as the top, but I'll put me down as never Nikki."
Oh,
and he's starting a
never Nikki.
He's starting a thing. Yeah. So
That's nice. That sounds good. Off the tongue.
I
Never
know.
Nicky. That's funny.
All right, so
what's the last
persecution
one?
of political rivals, and then people fighting for the quote right of kids
Oh,
to
yeah.
pay doctors to carve up their genitals.
And that just caps it off as a violent, corrupt, evil actions of our own government. Right?
So there's
And
something in
those
warfare.
power.
There's a strategy in warfare, right? My sons talk about this when they play their video games, and it's trying to create a sense of chaos in your opponent. And the way you do it is you make an attack, then you move,
The feint.
then you make an attack from another spot, right? You even can divide up your forces in a minor way and go around the sides. And what happens is a defender thinks, I'm getting attacked from here. Oh, wait, from there. Oh, wait, from there. There must be a lot of them, when in fact it might just be a couple.
That's right.
Then suddenly they're being attacked from the side, and you get overwhelmed. And in a battle, in a crisis situation, when you get that chaos overwhelms you, you freeze up. You don't know what to do, and then you die.
This
you lose.
is what I think Obama is doing. He is the one doing those feints, and he's the main orchestrator of that in our country.
If not Obama, whatever the left is
yeah.
and whatever embodies and
So
and
the
moves it.
question is, how do we respond to that? What? So Germans clogging the streets, Canadian truckers. You probably are in support of that.
Yeah.
That form. I am too, as an element of civil disobedience. I think it's a legitimate thing, even though, and the reason I think it is because I was going to say the midwives, and we must obey God rather than man. It's not probably technically that, because it's not like they're preaching the gospel and told not to. But the midwives are, I'm not going to go along with this death and destruction of these children.
But there's a reason tyrants make the Bible illegal. And one is because everybody's answerable to God when you read the
that's
Bible.
right.
But the other is we're all created in his image.
Yeah.
So when you start saying there's a hierarchy of society and we put people in castes of the elites and the middle and the lower, and really the attack is on the middle. We want to get everybody into poverty, so they're worried about
Make them in
food
the lower.
and paying rent. They don't have to worry about politics.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're undermining that created order
Yeah.
that God made every man equal in his image.
Yes, this is what our framers said. That's their Declaration of Independence, that we have a right to reconstitute a government. I'm not sure what I think about that. I understand that it resonates with me as an American.
Yeah.
It resonates with actually not just an American, but the element of revenge, which the Bill Ackman. I like everything inside of me vibrates with a positive. He's getting them. He's going to get them, right?
That's that Yellowstone,
It's the yellow. That's right. I'm
Defend
not
what's
sure if
yours.
it's right morally, because Jesus has a saying about somebody suing you and take your cloak. I tell you to give them the other one.
Well, then there's something about
If they hit you,
revenge on its way to vigilantism, on its way to revolution, right?
yes, that's
is
right.
saying the difference between revenge and justice is, this was my working definition from a couple episodes ago. If I'm getting revenge on your behalf, then I'm upholding justice. If I'm getting revenge on my own behalf, right?
Yeah, I hear that. There's a certain dynamic that's true in that.
But there is this crossover between that where you say, okay, you did this to me. No one should be able to do this to anyone.
To anyone.
And now I'm fighting for the community to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
And that's not the same as revenge.
I agree with you. Victor Davis Hanson, I got it right,
Good
right?
practice, yeah.
He has written several articles over the last year or 2 years and referencing the Jacobin Revolution in France versus the American Revolution.
Yeah.
And the bloody lawlessness of the one in France. And the people rose up and they guillotined people. They cut their heads off all over the place, the elites.
Yeah.
And he says, what his main point that he keeps repeating from various angles is, we're on our way to that one, not the American one.
That's right.
In what's happening today.
Because
And
the
that's
American
not
Revolution,
good.
American Revolution was so intellectually rigorous. Most revolutions in history, from the Russian Revolution on down, it's like, we're starving and we're going to kill you because you won't let us
Yeah,
survive.
that's right. That's right.
It's us or them.
Yes.
I think the promise of the Bolsheviks was like, we'll give you bread.
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
So America's promise was no taxation without representation. Like, what an intellectual, philosophical impetus for revolution. It's on par with nothing.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever gone that.
So let me throw out the question of violence to you. I'm asking you. Let me ask this question first.
Okay.
Do you feel my tension point and what
I do.
I'm aiming at?
Yeah.
Because I know we have some different values we're trying to express.
Right.
And I'm not sure, so I'm asking. I'm not trying to defend a position or assault yours. I'm just putting out there the question in a sense that highlights this, and just kind of trying to probe it and poke at it and just see, because I don't really know the answer. I know certain feelings that I have and thoughts and certain individual verses, right? But I think it's difficult. What do you think about the question of response to citizenry violence?
Well,
Do you think it's appropriate?
I think what it comes down to in a Christian, we're asking like biblically, should Christians
I know
do this?
that's
right?
what should we do starts to be moved from being a U.S. citizen to what about those of us who are Christians?
And I think the question is not. I want to clarify this. We're not saying what should the church do as an
No,
organization.
I agree with you there.
We're saying what is it within the rights and obligations as a Christian.
That is a legitimate question. Like down the road,
It's
that's
also
another
an important question.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a good
So
way
there's
to
a
put
phrase I've heard often: "As resistance to tyrants is obedience to God." I think if you say that that's true, then the American Revolution holds up. Mm-hmm. I think that's the foundation of it. Mm-hmm. That if God's intent is that his people should be free, right? That he frees the slaves out of Egypt, that he brings freedom to the captives. All these promises the Bible, even though the Bible also upholds some limited system of slavery as a punishment
and
for
obedience
crimes,
to the authorities,
as a consequence
even
for
when
debt.
they're putting you in the arena.
That's right. Yes.
That's New Testament.
Right. And I think that becomes the difference between the church's obligation to say, in the name of Christ, are we having a revolution? Or as a Christian, is revolution a moral option in the face of tyranny? I think those are different.
This is the Bonhoeffer.
Right.
We know he wrestles and decides as a Christian, he thinks, I'm going to plot to assassinate Hitler.
Well, and this comes down to
tyrant.
I hear this concept talked about with abortion.
Yes.
If someone's coming to arrest and kill, or let's not say arrest because that implies government authority. Let's just say there's a gang of thugs breaking into your neighbor's house. Mm-hmm. Do you go defend your neighbor?
Yes.
Not do you have an obligation. I don't know that you do.
Yeah.
But is it wrong to go?
Yeah.
And there's a point, and I think we're approaching it, where the difference between our government and a gang of thugs is not that big.
This is why I think
shocking.
It's the issue of our times.
Yeah.
And I think it's been going on I think the Trump presidency set it in motion unintentionally. I don't think he meant to set it in motion.
Right.
But it triggered the openness of what I think, personally think Obama had a veiled agenda at. And had there been no Trump. And
you blame Obama, but I think Bush brought us right down the same road.
I agree with you, but I also don't think it was with the same kind of malice. I think in Bush there is a part of being an elite, but I think there is also some genuineness.
So here's the thing, because I've been thinking about this.
And you
Obama.
can disagree about Bush, but
I think you might be right. I don't have the certainty, but what I'm saying is, when I see incompetence or major errors in the conservative world or in the Republican Party, I usually assign it to a few people with nefarious intent, or maybe they're not. Maybe they're just trying to get theirs, right? I'll get mine and screw the consequences. And then a large part is incompetence. People don't know how to lead. They don't know how to make a change. They just do what they've always been doing. Mm-hmm. So we assign incompetence to our side, and then we assign malice to their side. Mm. But I think their side is the more likely to have incompetence if you take into the account the DEI stuff, that they're perpetually hiring incompetent people just because they can check off these boxes that give them more
chaos. Yeah,
they're actively undermining the meritocracy.
Yeah,
they've stated that openly.
Yeah,
so they don't want the most competent, meritorious selections. They don't want the fastest runner to win the race. So then they're going to get more incompetence.
People not capable of leading on merit, leading.
Right. So then you're going to... So does that make those people more vulnerable to
I hear what you're saying.
A nefarious person, maybe Obama, right?
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Okay, so I probably shouldn't have taken us down the thread because violence. Is there a place then for violence? Is there a place for... What are the range of options in your mind for opposing this? I mean, the list is egregious, and the capstone of it is the mutilation of children.
Yeah, that's the one that gets me the most.
Every person's heart should say, no one would advocate that a Christian response to a brutal rapist on the sidewalk is that I'm not supposed to do anything.
Right.
Nobody would advocate
Violence
for that.
is not the answer.
Yes,
Yeah,
they
that's
wouldn't
nonsense.
say. And yet I lean towards certain feelings when other dynamics come into play of authority and governments and whatnot. I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong, but I mean, this is what I'm working through. Where would you put violence as a legitimate? Because that list is leading towards violence.
Yeah. I
In
mean,
response.
the generic answer that's not satisfying is as long as there is a legal option, we continue down that option.
That's why I put the
But I
democracy.
feel like that option is running thin.
And we do still have that, but I agree with you. It's running thin, and what's difficult is to assess it. We don't know how much is true.
Right.
Because that thinness is concealed,
That, yes. Well, I feel it when I say
obscured.
our only hope is the Supreme Court, right? When I start thinking that, I know we're in trouble. What I also see is under the 2020 lockdowns and COVID, you began to see governors saying no to the federal government in ways that hadn't really happened before, at least not in this level.
That's true.
And I expect we're going to see more of that coming up. And
Have you
Scott
watched
Adams, who we've talked about,
Yeah.
he made a crazy prediction that I think could very well happen, which is that he predicted the next winner of the presidency will be no one, that the election will be unaccepted, that the Supreme
my
Court will
goodness.
require a do-over because it will not be
Holy
trustworthy.
cow.
If that happens, that is razor thin that you start saying
Anarchy.
states forming coalitions and saying our government is separate from yours.
And we're already seeing that. I don't know if you've been following the Texas stuff with the border and the federal government. Basically, they're fighting over Texas's border, and the federal government saying, you federally can't do that. That's our border. And Texas saying, it's our state border. So they've made laws to send people back over.
The Constitution literally requires the federal government to protect the border.
There is an issue
Straight
there
up,
but as a state, you're also being overrun by a corrupt federal government.
So what we're saying is two questions: is one, does a governor, let's say a Christian governor, whether
both
that's authentic
Abbott
or not,
and DeSantis have
Christian roots,
they have faith in their stories.
So is a Christian governor within his rights and obligations to obey authority under God okay to defy Joe Biden's,
Especially since
DHS.
he is a part of the authority structure.
That's right. So that's step one.
And that's
But
the William Wallace
step
thing.
The second step is, and maybe this is a little more like William Wallace in the sense that he was a regular guy.
Until he
What do
was,
people like you and me who don't hold positions of
Yes,
power
this is the question.
obligated or even allowed to consider when it comes back to pushing back against a corrupt
That
authority?
is the question. And I think there are clear ends of the answer and murky middle.
Yeah.
The clear ends, if we go down and see somebody being beaten, I've watched the videos of bystanders filming thugs beating somebody. And I pray and hope to God that if I were in the scenario, I would step in and risk getting beaten myself to defend somebody.
Right.
Even with violence, right? On the other clear end, there is a violent revolution. France Jacobin, hang him in the street style, is clearly godless.
Yes, that's right.
It is not right. It is vigilantism that has gone into revolution. And so there's these two things that are clear, but I think the middle ground is difficult.
Okay, so here's a quote that haunts me.
Okay.
This is Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah.
He's writing from a Russian gulag or after the fact. And he says this. He says, how we burned in the camps later, thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family? Or if during periods of mass arrests, as for example
These
in
are the
Leningrad,
oppressors. If
if
they
the
had that
oppressors
fear.
had been afraid.
Yes.
He says, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, if people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and every step on the staircase, but had understood they had nothing to lose, they had nothing left to lose, and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand, the organs would very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers and transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt.
So if you ask me, I would say, and want to reflect on it more and be willing to change my mind, I think that's the best. That's the one I like most.
Yeah.
Because it says this, I can get my Glock or my MP Shield, and my wife and I can get trained and certified, and I can have shotguns, and I have a deer hunting rifle, and
But how do you know when to get them out? That's the question.
I know.
Because political arrests are happening.
Yes, they are happening. But you know what I've seen more and more of is homeowners shooting intruders.
Yeah.
People in public pulling out, and good Samaritans shooting the one holding up the liquor store or whatever, or citizens on a train.
But are you seeing it more because it's happening more, or because
I don't know.
We're clicking on it more?
I have
Do you know
no
what I'm saying?
idea. Yeah.
Both are an interesting thing, because it could just be, one, there's more videos, so you're going to see it, right?
Yeah.
More cameras everywhere.
Could be.
But two is, people want to see it more. So there's this hunger for justice in a way that's not being satisfied.
Justice and violence.
A violent, self-inflicted justice. I'm going to stand up for my community when the police or the government won't.
And then what I see in those stories, they're pretty regularly coming across, is sometimes the person who did right is lambasted and persecuted.
Yeah.
Even by government. At other times, they're getting a complete pass because everybody understands it. And it's almost like the government is powerless to do anything about it. They would like to, but they can't.
But you know what the difference is? The difference is where you live.
It's a huge factor.
And where we live,
that's right.
Anybody who stands up for that is going down. Right?
That's the likelihood. Okay. Let's throw in your World War II. Do you think this is connected? You think
I don't know.
How the conversation developed?
I was listening to someone talk about all the different casualties of the wars that America has been engaged in since World War II. So Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iraq again, and a bunch of small skirmishes in between.
Yeah.
And what they were going through is saying, well, look at how much death we created, right? So yeah, we fought in Vietnam, and there was a certain number of Viet Cong who died, but there was actually millions who died in Laos and in Cambodia. And America's destruction in those places created what we now know to be the Cambodian Khmer Rouge and the genocide that instigated. And so we rightly, I think, point to the deaths under Soviet and communist China and communism, what it's done. Maybe 100 million people died in the 20th century, but we then ignore estimates of a million or more people dying in Iraq. Not killed at our hands, but killed because we went there, upended the entire social order, allowed gangs and thugs and warlords to dominate and war within the cities, and just destroyed a country to get revenge for the loss that Bush perceived his father. You know, what was the real reason? We don't even know. And so what I think of is the deaths in the 20th century. This is what dawned on me. I was attributing the deaths in the 20th century to the First and Second World Wars and then the communists. But in fact, along our end was millions upon millions of deaths that we caused as Americans. And that's what led me to think, okay, it wasn't just World War II. Maybe the whole thing just kept going. You know, there's all these proxy wars and power struggles that are causing these massive suffering on a scale never before seen in history. You know, and we could all root it back to Nietzsche's idea that God is dead. And once we kill God, we can never wash away the blood. The blood flow will be endless, but it continues today. It's not as if we got God back now that we're in the 21st century. And I don't know where this heads.
I hear you. In a sense, what if I reframed that statement a little on a parallel path would be, we think of war as the names of war. World War II, it starts, it ends. On a day. Vietnam starts and ends. But then if you put all the ones that start in one sense, well, you mean, frankly, we've been warring the whole time.
Well, and there have been a regime of people, a collection of powerful people who have been trying to work toward global one world government for a long time, right? And there was for a while, you know, and maybe when I was younger, it was a conspiracy theory, but it's pretty open. It's pretty obvious, right, what the EU is trying to do and what all these different strategies are. Even when you watch the World Economic Forum talk about the Great Reset and how they're going to respond to COVID, or how they predicted COVID and how they would respond before it even happened. It's all very clear. We're centralizing power. We're bringing up into the center really wealthy, powerful people to run and make.
In one sense, let's just fall back on our Christian theology, and then we're going to move on, is Genesis 6, there's violence in the earth, and men were repeatedly and constantly violent, and God does something about it. And in one sense, he restrains some of the forces behind that, but nevertheless, violence has not gone away. We are a fallen people, prone to violence. Hatred, murder, violence, and okay.
Well, and Jesus says that when he returns, it'll be like the days of Noah.
Yes, that's
The
true.
violence will increase in the earth.
Okay, the Trinity School.
Yeah, the Trinity
Culture
School.
building enterprise. I was going to do the read here and
Oh,
just do it
okay.
a quick one. Targets education, influence industry, and arts. And I would also just add trying to generate young people who would have minds open to think through things themselves as they grow and mature. Because they are impressionable now. And so we want to teach them to learn.
Teach them to learn. Teach them to think for themselves.
Think for themselves.
Right.
Yep.
And that is, I think, one of the shortcomings of Christian education as it's existed in the last, say, 40 years. It becomes a very mom-focused world, and rightly so, right?
Yeah.
In a traditional mom staying home and raising the kids and dad's going to work, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But there's an age where, especially boys, but maybe not, I think both definitely need it, boys and girls, a father figure, a male role model to be added into this. Whether it's dad, it should also be dad, but there's coaches, there's youth pastors, there's others, but somebody to say, the world's bigger than you realize, and there's more you can do, without overselling it as it's up to kids to transform the world in its brokenness.
Yeah.
That's not true.
Yep. If you want more information, go to gracedayton.com/Trinity School. Okay, let's do two more things and to head us home.
We got to talk about angels.
I know, that's the second of the two things. The first thing is, why don't you do your video on fathering, and I'm going to assume we'll talk about that for a second and wrap it up with your William the Marshall story.
All right,
about
I got
honor,
a couple stories, but I want to show you this video.
Yeah, let's see this video here.
If I can get it to come up.
First ever on
All right.
Second Thought.
So watch
Showing
this
the
video, and the question is, what is good fathering? And we'll show it to you, and then we'll talk about it. There it is. Okay. So the question is, did the dad do well? And this was posited by a pastor who I don't follow, but I happened upon it, who sort of opened it up for discussion. And I thought, when I'm on Twitter, I see a lot of conservative voices. That's who I follow. So I thought I was going to see people saying, well done, Dad. And instead, comment after comment after comment was, no, Dad did it wrong. And I was like, this is not good. This is the problem we have, that if you, and this is my take on it, right, is that, should he not have been in that situation if he'd been fathering well before? Would it have prevented that? Yeah. But the reality is every dad ends up in that situation at one time or another. Maybe not on that scale, but our kids misbehave. And so how do we respond?
And we do poorly. We set ourselves circumstances up that do become partly our fault. We do. That happens all the time to everybody.
And not only that, we also fall into a power struggle that our wives engage in and make more difficult, right? And our wives tend to be more motivated to get peace and harmony in the household, right? Versus law and order, so to speak. And so my response to that was, if you criticize and discourage dads when they do it right, focusing on why they didn't do it right before, you're going to get dads less engaged.
Or even how about if, say, instead of do it right, which is fine, but also they're trying to do it right.
Yes. And the thing I respect about that dad is he did flash some anger, right?
Yeah,
Book report
right.
now, but it wasn't a rage. He wasn't reacting. He was making a decision and taking a stand.
That's true.
And I respect it.
Yeah. So in general, you like the response?
I do, yeah.
I mean, I do too in general. And so what did we viewed it right before, but what did you think about the, here's what it was. Because I said this, and you said I would disagree. I said, I like what he did, but I also think he should have later gone to both his wife and to his son, because he helped create the scenario.
Right.
By what he had done before. And I think that warrants repentance. I think authority is not, and now I'm partly responding to, I know that you're going to object to it. So,
yeah.
But I think
not
that
authority
is not undermined by repentance. And
I do agree with that.
Yeah. But that's why I would say, not connected to the situation. Let this situation play itself out a little bit. Let the authority stand, but then come up later and not retrospect, but include his own repentance. I wish that hadn't, I don't apologize for what happened, but I do think that I helped contribute to get us there, and I want to work at that. And so I think there's a place for repentance in that, with the kid as well.
Anytime, and I don't know, I think I would follow my conscience and the Holy Spirit and how I would, whether I would repent and so on that kind of level. But anytime you exert that level of authority, you do have to deliberately reestablish loving kindness.
Yes, that's
Right.
another way to say it.
And
yeah.
so you have to make a point to say,
And
I'm doing this
ownership.
for you.
You said earlier the woman, peace and whatnot pursuing, and I agreed with that. I thought you were going to say something else. Genesis 3. The woman is in part wanting to be the one that leads and call the shots.
Sure.
And the man's inclination is to dominate over aggressiveness.
Right.
And I think I see seeds of that in
both.
in both of them in that
Right.
scene as well, which means that as much as I'm in agreement with you, I think it was fundamentally a good illustration, but it also has brokenness in both mom and dad. And I don't think it's ever wrong. I think it's wrong to display repentance for your brokenness if you're undermining a virtue in doing it.
Yes.
But let the virtue develop and take its root and then go. I think it's important that your kids see you as a repenting dad and a repenting mom.
Right. And the thing I would watch out for is, I guess, how I would phrase it. And I think this is as important as any repentance you might do. And that's why I would hesitate. Is in your repentance, if you are conveying the message without meaning to, that your negative, rebellious, self-centered response to my authority was justified because now I'm apologizing.
I agree with you.
And
That's
so
right.
that's where I would say I would hesitate or delay apologies until that is solid, that your
Well, I would have
response-
the delay too. I would
Yeah,
be in
yeah, yeah.
agreement. Let the initial authority and submission to authority have some room to plant
Right.
the seed.
So maybe an hour later, the next day,
Or
when the book report
something
is
like
done.
that. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. That's exactly right. And I think that models that mom could do the same.
Right.
And frankly, it lets the kid go through it and basically has them the space to say, I just got caught up in this. I'm sorry.
What would be really powerful and interesting, as you said, mom too, is if that mom and dad, and you can sort of read into the story that maybe he's the stepdad, right? Mom, tell your husband to get out of my way or whatever he said. How powerful would it be for that husband and wife to come to the realization that they both need to rearrange how they're establishing authority in their household?
Exactly.
And that be the conversation they have with the kid.
I exactly agree.
That it's not dad's obligation to go apologize while mom was actively and openly undermining him
Yeah.
and the right decision.
So do
he
you
was
think
making.
that if he's a stepdad, does it change your assessment of it?
I think
Because the first eye, you don't watch it thinking he's a stepdad.
I immediatly thought stepdad in that.
Did you really?
When he
I
said,
did
get your
not
husband
at
out
all.
of the way.
Oh, I heard that, but I took it as sassy.
It was pretty good, yeah. Boy, yeah, that, because my blood gets up when I hear that kind of thing too. But one, I think there's a reason Jesus says not to remarry, except under very limited circumstances, because you create this sort of conflict. Two, if there was ever a circumstance where I would become a stepdad, it would be with a very clear understanding that my authority would still establish as if I were
Yeah.
the actual dad.
Yeah.
And kid would have to understand that, wife would have to understand
Yeah.
that, or you just, it's a no-go.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
cannot
That's interesting.
undermine
You
that
say it,
authority.
that's exactly what I think too. Because my first thought when I heard that stepdad, it alters it, but it just throws a wrinkle of contextual challenge. It doesn't change what should happen, in my opinion.
That's right.
But that's as long as it was established on the front side.
The fight that he and his wife are going to have later is going to be more complicated because of his
And
stepdad's
the
status.
complication with the kid too.
Yeah.
Because the kid's connection is not the same. And so that the stepdad who is now dad, in the best sense of the word, with the support, and let's say they did it up front, he still has to battle with how hard that is for the kid's heart. It's
Yeah.
still wrong to treat him that way, but there's got to be some room to understand how hard this is.
And this is a topic I've talked about a lot lately, is that the ability to obey authority is a skill that many, many children don't have.
That's correct.
Because they weren't lovingly given it by their parents.
That's right.
And so that skill carries to your teacher at school. It
Yeah.
carries to your coach on the field. It carries to
Yeah.
your boss in the workplace.
Yeah.
It carries to your stepdad when you're at stepdad's
You know,
house.
what's interesting, I just saw this morning. I've talked with you several times on the air a little bit about this authority, the dinosaur power, butterfly power, over authority, under authority, and the submission in 1 Timothy 2, and that there's a beauty and glory in submitting, right? I've talked about that. I thought of it in this context with the words obeying and the words of a will. And I thought, oh, another way to say it would be this. God has established a beauty and glory to obey the will of another.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus did. He obeyed his Father's will. It was his Father who determined. Now, he goes voluntarily to come as a man.
Yeah.
But it's the will of his Father that he does. And in the garden, at its deepest, it's not my will.
Right.
And so another way to, instead of using the word submission or it's these other words over and under, you could also say there is a beauty and glory in God to exert will. And there's another beauty and glory from God to submit to will.
Yeah.
The
And that's
will
a
of another.
conversation I've had many times with my kids is one, everybody has a boss. Everybody does.
Yes, that's right.
And even the king of the dictator and ruler, God is still his sovereign, right?
Yeah. That's
The
right.
other side of that is there's a strategy that we use in both teaching and parenting. I call it triangulating, which is to say it's not, I'm not punishing you. The rules are punishing you. Remember we said,
Yeah.
if you don't do this, this is the consequence. I have to do it now. We said it.
Yeah.
And so you put the blame, instead of it being a personal conflict that I'm giving you this grade, that I'm giving you this punishment. No. The rules do that. You're making
the
a triangle.
consequence of the moral world.
And
that
so
we
on
live
some
in.
level, what Jesus is doing is saying, it's not my will. It's
Yeah,
the
that's
Father's
right.
will.
That's right.
God said this is how it should be. Therefore, that's how we have to make it.
What it works out to be is that this whole dynamic is a part of reality because God made everything.
Right.
And so he puts in place a beauty of submission because in one sense, he's the only one that doesn't have a boss
Yeah, that's right.
in the reality of things. So
The one thing I
Okay.
would add, can I add a little more wrinkle to
yeah,
this?
yeah.
That is that that kid is, when I think about how to respond to misbehavior in kids, I think of it in terms of what is their mindset. Are they impulsively insecure and just trying to get their way like a spoiled child? Or are they deciding, I'm going to be in control now and I'm going to take over and I'm trying to dominate, which I would put that kid in the second category. In which case, I think that's why I push back on the idea of you should go apologize, because you don't apologize the same way to a kid who's struggling for power, which they will see as a point of leverage that they can exert on you later, versus an insecure and needy kid who's just fearful and wants to be accepted
That's
and
true.
successful.
But I would say that as long as the authority and the move is established, and this would argue for the time issue,
Right.
you don't want to undermine the virtue of what happened.
Yeah, that's right.
I agree.
Yeah.
Hey, William the Marshal, does that connect to any of this?
So this is about political intrigue and such. It's just a cool thread I wanted to read, talking about the difference between, we in our kind of modern pessimism have sort of accepted that political power is all about corruption and deception. I have had my boys read the 48 Laws of Power. My oldest has read it. The others will later, which says that to gain power, the number one rule is to be deceptive, right? And we've sort of accepted this. Politicians lie, we say, and we sort of say, what are you going to do? And so William the Marshal was a cool story from someone I follow called the Chivalry Guild. And I thought it would be fun to just read it and think about it for a second. He says, William the Marshal lived a long and legendary life and saved the best for last. William had served the Plantagenets for decades. This is British royalty, going back to the days of Henry II. William knighted Henry, the young king, and then served Richard the Lionheart and John in turn. So this is right around the Robin Hood era, right? Prince John and the like.
1300s, early 1400s.
It says he was forced to watch the dynasty decline.
By the way, Game of Thrones is based off the Plantagenarians.
Okay, and we're
family.
gonna get to the Game of Thrones. Here.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So it says he was forced to watch the dynasty decline in later years, thanks to John's incompetence. And then in 1216, after the death of John, the country faced an existential crisis. With the crown passing to 9-year-old Henry III, rebel barons and the French saw their opportunity, and this led to the Battle of Lincoln in 1217. William assembled 400 knights and 250 crossbowmen and marched them to meet the enemy. The future of England was to be decided. He delivered a rousing speech to his forces before the battle. Listen now, sirs, glory and honor are at hand. Right here and now you can win the country's freedom, truly. So damn any man who fails this day to challenge those who seize our lands and property, and may God see their right prevails. The enemy are here, right here in our hands. They're at our mercy, I promise you, come what may, unless heart and courage fail us. And if we defeat them without a lie, we'll have won lasting honor for all time. So imagine being there to hear such an exhortation delivered by perhaps the greatest knight who ever lived. And it goes on and talks about and it's longer than I was thinking. So he goes on to talk about how William the Marshal lived, and that it wasn't by intrigue and deception, as we think of, to gain power. In fact, it was by upholding his honor to such a degree that when he was slandered, even by King John, no one would believe it because he was so trustworthy and so determined to do what was right. He was the champion knight in all of the what do you call it? When they would go, like the sporting events where the knights would face each other and joust and sword play. So he was a champion athlete, a fighter, a leader in battle, and a man of honor. And that's what gained him power politically because people believed what he said when he said it. And so I'm putting that forth for our listeners, and also I put it forth for my sons and my students to say that you can engage in the political war without becoming a snake, right? I was talking a while ago about, if all politicians are just prostitutes in suits, you can't say, well, I'm a Christian prostitute, right? But if you could say, no, politicians aren't all prostitutes, you can be a man of honor and gain power.
So I think that's interesting that you say that, and hearing you say it that way without being a snake.
Yeah.
Because what it highlights is a way you may be hearing me, because I agree with that being a snake is a bad thing, but I'm also questioning the role of power to assert your will as a reflection of the kingdom of heaven. Is power to be, and you're saying, and you might be hearing me, or I hear the snake part of it, and I agree with that, but I'm not even sure about power that is done honorably, that is an assertion of political power. Not just the corrupt kind, but even by honest people that aren't necessarily placed in power. Now, being a knight, I'm not sure if he would have a certain authority given to him, and
he held position higher than knight.
Yeah. So I mean that complicates it, but okay. Well, we'll have to come back to that, and I don't think about that.
Well, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. Are you thinking about? Let's say you became so powerful in your position as, like we talked about, the governor of Oregon, right? If you're the head of the Republican Party in a state as its governor, you hold a lot of sway. And if Republicans are a supermajority, you basically run the whole government as its head, right? So at that point, you can do things, and we see this on the Democrat side with the Oregon government, do things that are clearly against even the will of the people.
Yeah.
Is it okay as a Christian if the will of the people is to legalize abortion and perpetuate kids having their genitals mutilated? As a governor, if you were in power to say no and make it illegal, would that be wrong?
Right.
Is that the example you're sort of setting?
No. Okay. But that is another layer of complication when you are given. So God puts authorities in place, and when you're a part of that structure, I think what it implies is you have more calling on God to do stuff with that.
Yeah.
That's legitimate. I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the Christian citizen who is not a part of the authority structure.
Okay.
So now I would say there's three issues. One, there's the authority structure issue. When you're inside of it, what can you and can't you do?
Right.
The second is the corrupt, or I'll put it down here, the corrupt one. I agree. I'm not even talking about the corrupt wielding of power. I'm talking about the non-corrupt, that Jesus seems he says, don't lord it over one another like the Gentiles do.
Right.
To me, that's the corrupt.
Yeah.
I'm trying to put you under my thumb in any means that it takes to do it. That's what the nations do. But then he has the other things. Somebody's suing you. They're unjustly taking your cloak as a fellow citizen. Don't respond in violence. Actually just submit to it, the injustice, and let them have it.
Right.
If they slap you and they do you physical harm, not taking your life, so it's not bringing up self-defense to live, but it's the insult to your dignity. Don't fight it and exercise the power. That is your right. Don't actually do it. Turn the cheek and let them slap you another time. And so I put that in this middle category of, I'm not sure how that works itself out as the Christian citizen of heaven in the earthly realm of a citizenship where you have a power, but the Christian citizenship seems to be saying not the same kind of power. And so the corrupt is a different issue. When you're in the sphere, that's a different issue. But then there's this middle one that's the one that is concerning me.
Well, and I think that's what the difference we talked about earlier between revenge and upholding righteousness.
It might be.
Vengeance is a huge part of power
might be.
play in politics and such.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
That you wronged me, I'm not going to forget it.
Yeah, it might be that. Well, let's move into our last phase here. Before we do, I'm gonna make a comment on a new thought. But before we do, you got a recommendation?
All right, I want a sort of recommendation.
Sort of recommendation.
I want to recommend a song that hasn't come out yet. So I've only heard the chorus, and I say I recommend it because, man, it's a catchy chorus. But I noticed something about it. So the artist's name is Benson Boone. The song is Beautiful Things, and right now it's on Instagram as the background to all these different videos. It's like catchy, right? It's a really catchy little chorus.
Benson Boone.
But as far as I know, that you can't even listen to the song yet, or if you can, just barely. It's just coming out. No, not till the 19th. So what I noticed is it's clearly he's not a Christian, right? But the song, I'll read you some of the lyrics. It says, "Please stay. I want you. I need you. Oh God." Right? And I thought, he's playing with us. Mm-hmm. And I've noticed this in other non-Christian artists who, like Hosier, who wrote "Take Me to Church," which is a worship song to a woman defying God and his standards. Like, it's openly anti-God, but the title is "Take Me to Church," and he sings it. And I listened
their night
to an
together
interview.
is going to be sacred and
That's
explosive,
right. He
like a
worships
church.
her.
That's right.
It's the more you read it, the more twisted you see it is.
Yeah.
He talked about, as an artist writing this song, how many churches were reaching out to license that song and use it.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Why would you want to use this? I hate your God." Like, he was mocking God. And I think, okay, you could write a song that is against God, but plays at the wording in such a way that it feels almost worshipful.
Yeah.
And make you open up this secondary audience of Christians who want to like it and want to like their sin, because it kind of plays in both realms when you listen to these songs. Mm-hmm. How many music producers are doing this deliberately? Yeah. I remember when downloads, right, when it was a big controversy in the 90s among my friends, do you download this music for free or do you buy it, right, as a Christian? And then obviously what happens, because the only people having that debate really are Christians, I mean, not only, but for the majority, the music industry in the non-Christian world was completely collapsing and transforming because their revenue source of CDs was disappearing. Whereas the Christian music industry was growing because we were still buying these CDs because we wanted to do what's right and not steal it online.
Yeah, that's true.
So there is this income availability in the Christian music market, and I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
I was able to find, before we came on here, the actual lyrics, and they're more interesting even than the Hosier, because Hosier was clearly against God. This guy is clearly referring to God. So the line is, God gives and God takes away, but he's talking about his girlfriend. God, don't take away this girlfriend that he sleeps with openly, right, and spends the night with in the lyrics. And it's like, oh my gosh. So he's playing even more in that gray of like, Christians will like it, but it's not a Christian song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you read intentional corruption in it? Or do you read commercial greed?
Yeah, all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how much is it savvy marketing to open up a whole new, to overlap genres to get a bigger audience?
Do you read any confusion on the artist that it can indicate,
like, is he authentic in his
grappling, groping in the darkness for God?
I think it's certainly possible, right?
Yeah. I mean, when the other guy says, I hate your God, why would you use a song? Well, he's not groping. He was mocking.
Right.
But there are other people. I think that it's an ambivalent, it's a category of which lends itself towards,
well, and whether
can't
he's
escape God's world.
I mean, this is our perpetual debate, right? Whether he's deliberately trying to overlap or he's becoming more popular simply because that happens to be the overlap.
Yeah.
I don't know that it matters that much.
Yeah.
I think what matters is that we become aware of it in ways that we're drawn into a compromised version of Christianity, because there's this appeal to, like, the world sees things too, and a version that gives us license to sin.
I just read with, sometimes it's embarrassing to say Greek because it feels like you're appealing to something, like I know this secret thing that somebody else doesn't. But these guys that I read with Greek, and we were just read one of the passages where Jesus is the woe to the scribes and Pharisees, the Pharisees first and then the scribes. And he says why, and it's been a hot day of debate. And they've accused him of casting out evil spirits by Beelzebub, right? And he's refuted that, and the crowd has been engaged. and they're stunned by his words, but there is hardening opposition. Okay. So he makes some of the strongest statements he's made to date. We're reading through the life of Jesus anyway. But what's interesting about the passage is he says, you, the scribes, you set up rules and regulations that you won't follow, but you make other people, and you hold the keys of knowledge to the kingdom of God, and you prevent people from getting into it. And then he'd said another thing earlier about being close to the kingdom of God. And so what I found interesting is Jesus has this category of people who are farther away and people who are closer.
Right.
But they're still not embraced him.
Yeah.
But they're closer.
He says you're not far.
You're not far even at one point
Right.
to one. So I just think that's an interesting gray scale that we have to, like the conversation in the songs you're talking about, there's a gray scale I lay over it and say, I think there can be people who dabble with things and there's a closeness that's going on. They haven't embraced. They don't even necessarily know entirely what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I hate your God is a stepping far away.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And there's others
And
that
Jesus
could
treats
dabble.
those people differently.
He does treat them different. That was going to be my point.
Yeah, I think so.
He
too.
has this category and he interacts with them differently.
And I would say as Christians, we have to be careful that we're not just villains and heroes
Yes,
to
that's right.
everyone.
That's right.
There is a middling ground.
That's right. Okay, let's do this one read because I wanted to make sure we don't go 2 episodes without it. We did have a response. We got a couple responses. We'll just mention really quick. One is, you mentioned it last week, Mr. Lindsay 7512. We appreciate the comment. I wanted to make a note on the comment. He commented on our natural born citizenship and what we talked about Haley and Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And he gave a little history of it, which is really interesting and I think supported what we were talking about in general, talking about its original thing being founded in foreign people born in England and whatnot, in France, and being not able to be president. And I thought that was contributive and helpful, way beyond my knowledge. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But he also made here's the thing I wanted to say about that. I thought that was a good point he made about the 14th Amendment and all this. But here's the thing. I think the reason so it was a good contribution, but the reason the point was being made was because I think it highlights the inability of our country to enforce its laws. Unwillingness.
Unwillingness, yeah.
And so what we're seeing is the left did it, and there was almost no ability, or even it got brought up lightly with Kamala. And then it was just let go. But we look at that and dismiss it because of the media is on the side of the left, right? Their voice. Well, here's what's happening on the right. There's a candidate who says, I'm on the right. Now, we know she's just barely right of center.
Yeah.
That's fine. You don't have to like her. But she's a Republican candidate, and she's not qualified, and nobody's saying it.
In the same way that Kamala Harris.
That's right. In the same way that she's not qualified, and nobody on the right saying, I'm sorry, you can't run.
And we're not saying she's not qualified for intellectual
To be
reasons or
leaders.
skill-based. We're saying that the requirements of the Constitution,
That's right.
in order to be in the executive
I
branch.
think the highlight of the story is the left and the right's failure and unwillingness to uphold the law.
Yeah.
That is a horrible sign.
And it's for political purposes. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
I
think
agree.
I put it in the same category as
It's that
when people questioned Obama's
The snake
citizenship
power.
and show us the birth certificate. And it became this embarrassing, like racists and rednecks do this, and Trump dabbled in it for fun, you know. I think now that that's been cemented to say respectable Republicans don't go down that road.
I know it.
Now
That's
we can't.
exactly right.
Now we can't do it
I
with
think
Harris or
that
Haley.
It poisoned the well, so to speak. That's
Yeah.
the wrong metaphor. But okay, hey, read your comment. We got one more comment, and we
Okay, let me
what do
find
we
it
got
really
here?
quick.
Okay, Pastor Mac, we're going to call him that.
Yeah.
Pastor Mac. The comment was, well, there's a little bit of humor in it.
Yeah,
What did
yeah,
he
I'll
say?
get it to it.
Airless, airheads, not airheads. I know there's the wafer of truth, but wafer
says-
thin. But
he
what's the
said,
first?
I've never heard so much philosophical garbage in my life.
There's,
This is Maca based.
yeah.
I thought I'd found something good here, but was so wrong. Scripture out of context.
Oh, okay.
The personification of the
So
earth.
much garbage. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for the reply, right?
Yeah.
We're great. But hey, scripture out of context. What? Just say which one. I mean,
That's what, and
right?
that was I did reply, and I said I appreciate the critique. is there more scripture you wanted to add? But we haven't heard back.
Yeah.
And I would assume we wouldn't.
Yeah.
He's not obligated to come banter with us about it.
But wait, we can make a second point on second thought points here. Kids routinely do this. I've done this. You have a complaint against your parent. Mm-hmm. It's a feeling. You got no specifics. There's an element of which you want to give honor to a complaint, but you got to have an example so we can talk about it.
Yeah. Well,
Otherwise, it doesn't do anything.
His biggest pushback was our talk about boomers. You know,
I saw that like 3 times.
That last episode, we focused on boomers' last stand, and is this all craziness a power grab or a refusal to let go?
Well, you know what would be fair? So maybe the guy's a boomer. I'm not sure,
Mm-hmm.
but
He is, yeah.
This would be fair to say. I think if you feel a twinge of being attacked, but shouldn't we say this? Every generation, I don't know what I am. Am I X? I'm X. Are you? What are you?
Yeah, I think we both are X.
Yeah, we're like at the opposite ends of X. There's Z, millennial. Okay, each of them, the whole reason we give them names is because there are characteristics that develop, that they share.
Yeah.
Some of them are strengths and some of them are weaknesses.
Right.
Ours has weaknesses too, and strengths, right?
That's right, yeah.
And boomers can point them out, and Zs and millennials can point them out. It's fair. It's not a bad thing. It's okay for us to be broken people.
Yep.
Right?
That's right.
Anything else we need to say on that?
No, I think
All
it's
right.
good.
Let's do one last thing. We're so over time. I just don't want to push it off one more time. I'm going to do a modified short version
All
of
right.
this.
This is your new idea.
Because this is the new idea 3 episodes ago I mentioned, and I never got to share it. It's about God's first family of angels. Okay.
So angels are who you mean when you say God's first family.
That is, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So God made 2 families, and I'm going to try to be very, very brief here. But original thought to me, which is fun, I've had 5 or 6 in my life, and I never thought it, never read it, and it's not just an insight that you put together or draw out.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was based on this, thinking about this over-under, and Psalm 8, what is man that you're mindful of him? You made him a little lower than the angels. Mm-hmm. So God made a first family of angelic beings, and they're the above family. They're stronger, they're more powerful, they're more intellectual. They have capacities of movement, and they have all these features that we don't have.
Yeah.
We're the second family, and we're made lower than the angels. That's the biblical Psalm 8. I think that what it says is that when we were made, I think the angels were stunned. Look at these people he made. He put his spirit, his ruach in them.
Yeah.
And they have flesh, and they bleed. And they're weak. They're not very strong. They can't go anywhere. Look at that. The guy had to take a step that's 2 feet at a time. We just thinking we're somewhere else, right? Whatever I'm hyperbolizing language. But and then I think the second thing that stunned him is this. They have babies. Because I think the indication in Scripture is that they don't propagate. The angels don't propagate themselves.
Right.
So so in other words, this lower than is made with a gift that the higher than doesn't have. So they each have a sense of a gift that is noble and glorious and reflects God.
Yep.
So as I was thinking about that, I was thinking that, they propagate, they have children, and we walk around on 2 feet. And then Jesus, this of God, Father, Son, and Spirit, and all the mystery that goes into 3 in 1, this second one is given to us as son, and born as human, and taking on, we know it's unnatural, but he took on our creation into his own self of physicality and legs, and
Jesus did. Yeah.
The second person of this Godhead who we call Jesus, and Son, and now the man Jesus, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's easy for us to think of our creation in God's image because we have the referent of Jesus as a man, that God made us in a sense, and it gets convoluted because the incarnation is after the creation of man, and so it gets difficult, but there's a connection point.
Yeah.
And this was the new idea that I had. What if the angels have a connection point to the Holy Spirit as spirit? They are called ministering flames, winds. Now, they can take on human bodies and flesh, but it is not of their nature. And furthermore,
How do you think they do that? What do you mean?
I have no idea how they do it, but they walk.
They must have a body unique to themselves.
I don't think, a body immaterial.
No, I'm saying
Spiritual.
when the angels sit with Abraham and eat.
Yeah.
There's some body that is uniquely their own. It's not. They're
I
not
don't know that
taking some other body.
Maybe. I don't think they're taking body. I think they create it and manifest it, but it is not their exist. It's not who they are.
Interesting.
They're not
Okay.
flesh and spirit. They're just spirit. But that doesn't mean they can't make flesh walk on ground.
So in Hebrews, when it speaks of them as ministering spirits, you think that supersedes the description of Genesis?
Oh yeah,
It seems
definitely.
to talk about flesh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that.
Yeah,
I think
no.
it's ontology. And what we see in the Genesis and then in even the New Testament, when some have entertained angels unaware.
Mm-hmm.
People have had stories of a person there and then not there, disappearing.
Right.
And so I think that they can manifest in the physicality of this world, though it is not their ontology.
And ontology meaning their root being,
yeah,
who they really
yeah.
are.
Ours is physical, and when we die and leave our bodies, we will not be existing in the form God intended for us.
But we have a spirit,
We have a spirit,
but we are
it's-
more than a spirit.
We are more than, and our spirit isn't just inhabiting our body, it's connected to our body, I think, in ways that we don't even understand. It is our mind, body, spirit, whatever that invisible and visible connection is, it's one.
Yeah.
And the death that we're going to experience is going to be ripping and tearing apart what was never meant to be ripped and torn apart. Thankfully, this can be reunited too.
So
for
in
us.
the reunion of heaven and earth at Jesus' return, would we become, or will we ever gain the abilities that angels seem to have?
Okay, this is where I think the idea begins
Because I think
to
you're saying
work
there's a
itself
fundamental
out.
difference that's deeper.
There's a fundamental difference, and
Yeah.
then now, when let's say I view it as a triangle, God the Father, and then the Son and the Holy Spirit, the triangle 3 in 1, but that can't be held to consistency because every analogy breaks down. But the angel family made after the image of the Holy Spirit, the earthly family, the human family after the image of Jesus. We look across the aisle and long to understand what theirs is.
Mm-hmm.
And so in human experience, now then you have to work the fall into it, but we're cut off from spiritual. So the fall makes us cut off in ways we don't understand.
Yeah.
But I think that even without the fall, I can only guess because of the sense of awe that we can feel at the presence of God in a graveyard. The noumena comes, and the sense of spirit is, the angels appear to people in the Old Testament and the New, and do not be afraid. They fall. Ezekiel falls down as dead.
Yeah.
The mystery and magnitude of the spiritual dimension is such that we are in awe of it, even frightened of it. Sin is worked into it, but even not. I just think it's something that we would look over at as participating in, but our realm is this one. And I think they do the same to us, which is why they were forbidden to come in and intermarry with the women of men. And they left their domain, it says, in I think Jude or 2 Peter.
Right.
And so I think that they have a realm and a wonder. We think to ourselves, I wonder if this explains the dreams of flying, the things that where we want to, the superpowers of invisibility, the things where we would crave and desire and be intrigued by what would be the properties of spirit.
Yeah.
And that they have the same towards us. And in the holy sense, it would just be a wonder and a joy. But then I think to myself, Jesus' resurrected body, he appears and disappears.
Mm-hmm.
He is able to walk and conceal who he is, and yet they see a person on Emmaus. He goes into heaven by rising up into the sky. He flies, levitates, whatever word you want to use from science fiction.
Yeah.
He does these attributes that we would not attribute to the fleshly existence of man. It begins to have more of what the angels have. So I wonder if the eternity is we get to share one another's or grow into them or something.
Yeah. And Jesus hints at something like that when he talks about when we die, we'll be like the angels.
There's that phrase.
Even though he's speaking, it seems, in a
another
limited
context.
way about
Yes.
relationships and
That's
marriage.
right. That's right.
I think of angels more broadly than I used to. So
Yeah.
there's a picture of an angel, that I used to
Yeah.
draw as a teenager when I
Yeah.
loved comic books.
Yeah.
With wings and strength and sword. Michael.
Yeah.
Or Michael the archangel who battles the Prince of Persia.
Yeah.
These sort of like
Yep.
heroic,
Frank Peretti.
angelic. Yeah.
Muscles.
But as I read it, I see creatures with wings that don't seem to be the same as these angels, right? I see
Yes,
angels
that's right.
going up and down a ladder or a staircase,
Yeah.
which means they seem to need to walk on some level. I don't know. Whereas these other beings that are covered thighs and multiple faces
Yep,
and wings
yep,
upon wings
Yep. Yep.
that are in heaven, but are just sort of called these living creatures.
Yes. Yes.
And so they're angelic is almost a limiting word. I think heavenly might
I
be a right
don't normally do it. I just did it for our audience listening. I prefer to use the word the family of spirits.
The family, okay.
Because I
These
think
spiritual
angels,
beings.
Yeah, and I think if you go back to the Dionysius guy in the 4th century, and he does a 9-part classification, it's speculative, but it's helpful. Angels are in the lowest class as a unique form of spiritual being. There are thrones and dominions, and he has them in like a middle class, and there's actually he has archangels in the lowest. But yeah, the living beasts and all. So I do think there is a stratification of existence among the angelic beings. There
Right.
is a tiered structure of some kind. Tiered's probably the poor word, but you have the beings, that have the face of an ox and of a thing. This is how they're
Yeah.
presented. And wheels and chariots and eyes and all what you were saying earlier. And then I think you even have spiritual beings in the New Testament that give a name principalities and authorities and rulers. And they're almost not given individualized names. They're giving conceptual names, general terms. And so I've actually speculated that on the spectrum of angelic or spiritual beings, could there be spiritual beings that are named and understood in personified words like Michael and Gabriel, and we think of them as they interact with us in such a way that we think of them as having feet and arms and whatever. And then maybe there's a middle realm that we don't really know any self-identifying personified elements, and they're called simply thrones. There's that peculiar verse in Philippians 2 that it says with Jesus, he'll be given a name above every name. I
Yeah.
think there is a strata of spiritual beings called names. And they're a reflection of glory and of might. But we might not even interact with them in the same way. And then I think there's 2 more verses that hint at this. Death in 1 Corinthians 15. By the way, death is personified, just like we played with Earth being Mother Earth.
I know.
And we got a little mauled there. But death, where is your sting? As if it's a being.
Right.
And I wonder to myself if it's possible that there are another opportunity to get mauled by people. But so George Lucas has the Force, right? I'm not opposed to there being spiritual creatures that are closer to the Force in nature that we don't know we don't understand. How does personhood interact with them? Maybe less than Michael. Maybe more like death. Could death be a force unleashed that is a spiritual dynamic of being that God, I don't even know.
So the way I've always taught it is, like we think of the Holy Spirit is I think a misnomer. It's actually the Spirit of holiness, right? But he's also called a spirit of revelation, a spirit of wisdom.
Those are used also,
Meaning
yeah.
that the name holy is actually its purpose. And we see that when we talk about a spirit of death or a spirit of adoption or a spirit of lies, right? Deception. And we get into the whole exorcism concepts around what demons are and spirits of evil and holy intent, okay? But the idea that I take from it is, and that's what I think is when it talks about names that can be named, that these names, and you see it with Lucifer or say the Satan or whomever, these names are roles. They're descriptors. Like Abraham is the father of many nations.
That's right. They're more than Mike and Luke.
That's right.
They have another layer of meaning to them.
And they're designations of purpose and authority.
I agree with that. That's what I agree.
And so Jesus' purpose, his authority, is above every other.
That's right.
He's the king of all the kings.
right.
There is one above them all.
That's right. That's right. The other one I think that hints at that is in Colossians when it talks about the elemental things of the world. The word elementals there is not elemental things. That's an interpretation.
So it's not like wind and water and fire and...
That's where we want to go.
Right.
But its original directional meaning, I would say, call it, is elementals are almost like forces of nature kind of things. And so it is but it's not so much a natural force that we would think of it. It has a spiritual dynamic to it of spiritual vitality, not just the force of nature.
And we are playing with this realm where, as Christians, we want to, like, science is originated out of Christianity. It really is.
Yeah, that's right.
But science now is a very, like, materialistic perspective. And so we want to attribute death no longer to elemental forces, spiritual beings. We want to say, no, it's a natural consequence.
That's right.
And so is the rain. And yet God says he holds the rain. He stores it. He gives it as he pleases.
That's right.
And so there is personhood and intention behind what we can observe to be natural.
Right.
And the trick is, and I feel this too, is as Christians, we say, well, if we go down that road, we become superstitious pagans, right?
Yep.
That's why we built the modern world, to get away from that.
Yep.
But what I also look around and I say, okay, we're not that far from superstitious pagans. They're coming back.
Okay. And what I think is that the old world, the pre-Newtonian world, and the scientific revolution, Bacon and all what developed, they were not wrong. But they lacked the development civilizationally that we have been fortunate to live in, that explored the materiality of reality. We then, what we have done is the first phase just embraced new elements of science and didn't necessarily leave off the spiritual dynamic of things. But then we did. So now we occupy an either or. You're either the pagan and you don't believe in science,
right,
or you're the scientist and you have no place for spirit because you can't measure it, you can't control it, and who wants that?
And that's very much down to like our experts agree battles that we get around COVID.
Totally, that's right.
And I see all these people who question the COVID vaccine, and I think for a lot of good evidence, who are now questioning whether the earth is round, you know?
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
Oh my gosh. They're falling down into that pagan superstition.
So my question is, why can't we be, as Christians, people who say both have truth in them?
And this is where I get when I think about these angelic beings or heavenly, what was your phrase? How did you describe them? The world of spirits.
Yeah.
They have their own scientific laws. They have their own physical properties. We can't observe them.
No.
Or at least the way we can is so limited to be able to say this is measurable and repeatable.
Yeah.
Is very difficult, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. And what I resist, and I think this is where you get into pagan superstition, is to say, well, angels can just do anything, right? They have all the power. They can turn into this and do that and go there. It's like, no, they're limited too. Everybody has a God.
They have their domain.
That's right.
And they are called to live in it.
Yeah.
And I think the beauty of it is thinking about their domain to help us understand ours. That's why, to me, this thought was intriguing and made my heart beat faster and was exciting. And then you think about what's to come. I think we're called to speculate. That's not the right word. Imagine the life God means for us as we live this one. In fact, Walter Brueggemann, we'll end with this, an hour and a half, our longest episode ever. Walter Brueggemann writes a book called The Prophetic Imagination, and his main primary point was this, that when God called the prophets in Israel's history, one of what he did to them is help them to see, can't you see what I'm after? Call them to this. That's not the right path. Call them to this. And it was a function of God's working in them through their own imagination, what God is after with his people. What does shalom look like? And can't you see that this path defeats that? That path goes away from it. This path, God said don't do it and you're doing it anyways, but don't you see it's because he wants you to aim at this instead.
Right.
So imagination, I think, is a part of the calling. All right. You've been listening to the longest episode of On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. If you enjoyed this episode, found something to reconsider, our encouragement has been to share it with a friend and have these exact conversations. Have these conversations. You will benefit by them. They will benefit by them. And this is the way we can also affect our world, is asking curious questions and rousing thoughts of God. All right. Remember then, dig a little deeper and think again. We'll see you next time.